welcome everyone to the Invisible Crisis on the Transgender Community. We're very happy to have you with us. Today, we're going to talk about, we're going to be talking about all the issues that involve the transgender community, all the suffering they go through. And in order to discuss that, we have invited two of our specialists, Alicia and Amy. Welcome, Alicia and Amy. We're very happy to have you with us. Could you please introduce yourselves to the public? Maybe you could start, Alicia.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Pinelli. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a non-binary social worker and mental health practitioner from Ontario, Canada. I primarily specialize in working with 2S LGBTQ+ communities and supporting queer folks all across the country of Canada. I also was a service user for a very long time prior to getting into the field as a practitioner. And my main areas that I support folks with are gender journeys and sexuality journeys, as well as within eating disorders.
Thank you. And thank you again for being here with us. Amy?
Hey everyone, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be tuning in from. My name is Amy and my pronouns are she, her. And I also want to acknowledge that where I'm coming from in Calgary is home to the Treaty 7 people, the Blackfoot and the Métis region of Alberta 3. And what I do is I support our youth, age 11 to 14, with coaching privately with their own coming out journey, which is a wonderful thing to do. And I also provide training and workshops for educators or caring adults to help create those safe spaces or braver spaces in a school. So a young person can come and say, hey, I need help.
Which is wonderful because we all need help, and especially the community needs a lot of help. Before we actually get started on the subject, we have a poll. So you are gonna see some questions on the screen in order to answer. I'm gonna give you some time, about 1 minute, because we would like to know a little about the profile of the viewers, the people who are with us today. So if you could please answer the questions. Okay, so we have some answers already. So far, it's very interesting. Well, the numbers keep changing, but we do have half and half. Half was part of the community, the LGBTQ2S+ community. We have a third that is supporting the loved ones. Let's see, let's wait a little more so that we can actually have a picture. All right, so that's it. So the majority here is part of the LGBTQ2S+ community. But we also have 29%, which is here in order to support a loved one, which is very nice. We really appreciate that. And we have 29% who is not part of the community, but I guess you are here to learn more, I suppose. We do have 3 transgender people with us, great. We do have people who are here to learn more about it, as I mentioned. And let me see. Okay, the question, as a transgender person, do you feel discriminated? So what we do is we have 40% who says, yes, sometimes I do feel discriminated. We do have 52% who said never before, which I'm very happy to read that. And we do have 2 people who happened once. So for the next question, the majority does know a transgender person, which is great, which really tells me most of you are here to learn more and to support someone wonderful. Okay, so with this picture in mind, I just really wanted to know so that we can sort of guide our discussion. But before anything, I think when we talk about transgender, it's very important to talk about, you know, the basic. Not everyone knows much about anything. So we have 2 terms that we use to talk about people from the community, right? To talk about diversity. So we do have the LGBTQ2S+. And even I myself, I didn't know there's another term that we can use, which is the LGBTQIAN. Alicia and Amy, could you explain the difference between each one, please?
Sure, I'll do a few, maybe Alicia, you can do a few, and we'll kind of share it a little bit. So the most common is LGBTQ, and those stand for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, and then the 2S is two-spirit. Alicia, do you want to help me out with the rest?
Yeah, so first off, I noticed in the Q&A that someone asked for captions, so I don't know if anyone knows how to turn those on. I've been trying. I do not know how, so hopefully someone can get those on. I always use quite a long acronym, so I usually say 2S LGBTQIAAP+. So that's a big mouthful. And I work with a lot of folks and families, and I also teach at a university in regards to working with queer folks. And a big question that gets asked a lot is, what is the right acronym to use? Because there is a lot of acronyms out there. The acronym that I use, 2S, is, as Amy mentioned, for two-spirited, and then LGBTQ is the ones that we primarily hear. And as Amy mentioned, it's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and then Q can stand for either queer or questioning, depending on who you're talking to. The I and the one that I use stands for intersex. A, there's 2 of them. One of them stands for asexual, one of them stands for aromantic, and then P stands for pansexual. When I'm working with folks though, I always tell people that whatever acronym you feel the best saying is the right acronym. My suggestion is always to just add a plus to the end, because while that's not a fix in giving everyone's identity space, it does leave it a little more open-ended, so that way you're saying this isn't an exhaustive acronym. But if you were to struggle through saying the acronym that I typically say, it's going to come across a little bit less safe than if you were just saying something that you feel confident in. So if LGBT+ or LGBTQ+ feels the best for you, then that would be, in my opinion, the best one to go with, because that way you're showing that you're feeling confident and safe and secure in what you're saying. And the plus sign is really the only part that matters. The acronym's constantly changing. We're constantly having new identities being brought into light and given names of giving space and visibility. And so the adaptations of the acronym, I'm sure, will increase forever, which is why a lot of people end up calling it like queer alphabet soup, which is like kind of a joke, but yeah, it's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, I know here in Calgary, I sit on the Gender and Sexual Diversity Advisory Board with the Calgary Police Service. So another term to use, if the big long rainbow alphabet soup, you could also say GSD, which stands for Gender Sexual Diversity.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's why I wanted to start with this, because there's so much confusion. People don't know exactly what to use, how to refer to. People do get mixed up. So I think it's very important to clarify. And thank you for all these tips you gave us just now. And going on that sense, we're talking about gender diversity. There are some terms, right, that are used to refer to gender diversity, such as gender dysphoria, or gender identity disorder. I personally don't like that name very much, but could you two also talk about it, please?
For sure. So both those terms, gender dysphoria and gender identity disorder, they're very medicalized terms that were originally created through the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or the DSM, which is a huge book that has a bunch of different mental health concerns, used to be called mental disorders, that is used by practitioners for diagnosing folks. In the past, specifically folks who were gender diverse, specifically folks who were trans and trying to access transitioning supports, would have to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder in order to qualify for coverage in certain countries, or to qualify for doctors to allow them to access medical transitioning supports. But nowadays, that's not necessarily the case. You do not have to be in a lot of spaces diagnosed with either of these two things in order to access transitional supports, whether they be socially transitioning or medical transitioning, which the difference there is medical transitioning are physical changes that happen to your body, so things like hormone therapy or surgeries, whereas social transitioning is things like the way you dress, the names you might use, things that can be changed without the need for additional medications or medical supports. But the big thing for me, as someone who's non-binary, which falls under the trans umbrella, I get asked quite a lot if I have gender dysphoria, and sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And when I'm working with families, one of the big things that comes up is that feeling that every trans person is going to experience gender dysphoria, and that's not necessarily true. Some folks who are trans experience gender dysphoria and some do not. Really what it's referring to is having a dysphoric or disconnected view when you see your body. So feeling as though the body that you're in is disconnected to who you are on the inside. Some days I feel like that and some days I do not. And so it's something that isn't necessarily something that someone will always have or never have. It's a very fluid thing in my experience. Amy, do you have anything you want to add?
The one thing to add, just thinking of more of the youth, and it's, letting them lead the conversation, and, just having open and honest and, brave conversations with them, and letting them guide the conversation. And thank you, Alicia, for what you said. It was wonderful.
Actually, yeah, thanks again, Alicia. Actually, I was going to get into this, Amy and Alicia. Some people feel a lot of discomfort, right? They don't know how to talk to people. They don't know how to approach. The pronouns, I really want to bring these simple things. They might seem simple, but they're not as simple as they may seem in this discussion, right? So that's why also the use of pronouns is very important. So for example, me, I'm using she, her, so as is Amy, but Alicia, you're using they, them. What's, when you don't know how to refer to someone, how could you approach? What should you do? What's the importance of the pronouns actually in the plural?
Yeah, I'll start this conversation part. So a lot of the time when I like to introduce myself, especially to a new group of people, or if I'm starting a new job, or if I'm, in a different event, it's like, hi, my name is Amy. My pronouns are she, her. What are yours? So it's just starting that conversation with the people. And if you don't know, please ask, because, Alicia and I are just like you and everybody else watching. We're human, and you can ask us questions. We're not aliens.
Totally. And so for me, pronouns, it is a kind of up and down topic for me personally. In some spaces, I will do exactly as Amy said, and I'll introduce myself and say, hello, my name is Rachel Crandall. My pronouns are they, them, or hi, my name is Alicia. These are my pronouns. Would you like, if you have any you would like to share with me, let me know. I like to leave it open-ended for folks and ask them if they would like to share, they can, because not everybody feels safe sharing their pronouns in certain spaces. And so in therapeutic environments, when I'm meeting new clients, some of my clients come in not knowing what pronouns they want to use, or don't feel comfortable telling me yet because I'm not a safe person yet. And so I like to leave it open-ended and just share mine, because that kind of sets the tone with, hey, I'm someone that understands pronouns are important, but you don't have to share them if you don't feel comfortable. Because I've definitely walked into spaces before where I'll introduce myself and leave my pronouns out of it because I get some discrimination sometimes, or it isn't deemed a safe space for me, especially because I come across very female presenting. And so if I'm in a space where people think my gender expression, which is the way I display on the outside, is my gender, I might not feel comfortable or ready to have a conversation where I'm educating someone in that moment, especially if I'm there not as a practitioner, but just as myself. I don't always want to have to take on that role. And so I don't expect that the people that I'm speaking to want to either. So my suggestion is always, if you feel comfortable sharing your pronouns, that's wonderful because it sets that tone. But to leave it open-ended, or leave an invitation, like Amy said, for folks to share theirs back with you, because that can just be a kind of starting space. I also always try, and this is really hard at first, to use gender neutral pronouncing. So things like they, them, or neopronouns like Z and Zir, which are a little bit more complicated for some folks. So they, them is fine. Until someone does share their pronouns with me, because the last thing I want to do is misgender someone or make them feel like I've assumed their gender just based off things like the way they're dressed, their name, or even like for me, a lot of people do it off the length of my hair. And so it's kind of good to best practice to try to use gender neutral pronouns, which if you mess up, that's also okay. People mix up my pronouns all the time, and the best thing you can do is just say, oh, I'm sorry. And really just kind of acknowledge what happened.
Yeah, and there's some cultures from different countries. I've met a few people from not Canada, and they actually don't have pronouns. So that's another thing to just kind of keep in mind.
That's very interesting because, again, you know, we talked a little about this topic before. And as you said, Amy, you know, you can ask us questions. We're not aliens. Yeah, nobody is. So people are very careful about certain things. The pronoun is one. Are there other do's and don't questions that you feel people are sometimes afraid to ask and that they could, or something about really don't go into this, that's not comfortable in order to, you know, preserve the other person?
One suggestion I always make for folks is to just never ask about people's bodies. And this goes beyond gender identity. This goes for literally anything about people's bodies, which comes up a lot with my work in eating disorders as well. There could be a lot of comments on things like weight loss or weight gain, or if someone is transitioning, there might be comments on the shift in people's bodies, because it's a very awkward time when someone is medically transitioning. It's almost like going through puberty again. So comments on the body are never really a good place to go. And similarly, you don't need to know what is under people's clothing. A lot of people think it's an interesting question, or a question that because someone is maybe outward about being trans or non-binary or part of the community, that they would be okay answering it. I always go with the rule of thumb of, if someone has shared their gender with you, they will share the pieces that they want to share with you. Letting them know that you're open to hearing it is the best thing. But rather than asking questions, just letting folks know, hey, if you ever want to talk about anything, or if there's anything important that you would like to share with me about your identity, I'm here for it. That way it leaves it in the person's hands on what they feel most comfortable sharing with you at that time. Because even for parents, especially with kids, we might want to know what's going on. Like, I have an 8-year-old son. I always want to know what's going on with him, but sometimes he doesn't want to share things with me, and that's okay. He might feel okay sharing things with me in a year or in 2 months or next week. And so leaving it with folks kind of gives them that autonomy over their own decisions of how much or how little they share about their body, their identities, their transitions, whatever pieces they feel like sharing.
Yeah, and it's all about the comfort level. You know, thinking of what I do during the day of working with women mostly, or those who identify as female, on helping them come back to the workforce. You know, there's some things that you may be asked from a coworker, and you can, it's your comfort level. You, like me, I'm pretty much an open book. I will answer things pretty much really openly and honestly. Yet there may be some folks that are like, just say, no, I don't want to talk about that right now, or no, that's uncomfortable to me, or thank you for asking, I'm not comfortable answering. It could even be, thank you for asking. Is it okay if we maybe go for coffee and talk about stuff? Because maybe they don't want to talk about it at their workplace. You know, it's also interesting in a workplace situation because some people may not be out everywhere. And so if you know them from, say, your neighborhood where you live and you know they're in a same-sex relationship, don't out them at work, because that can be another scary thing and situation that could happen.
You know, the way I see it is a little like common sense. You don't ask, like, I wouldn't like questions to be asked myself either, even though I'm straight. So why would I ask someone else other kinds of questions? You know, like that's the way I look at it. And that's the way I feel. I don't want to be asked about my body either. And I don't want to be asked about what I do either. So I guess it's always the common sense about respecting each other, you know, and letting each other share what they want to share. We have a testimonial here that I would love to share with you, if it's okay. But it says, as an adult trans man, it's good to see the support finally being given to our younger rainbow family. Though having only recently come out to my own family as an adult, I've found there is seemingly almost no support or advice for adults coming out or for their older parents. Difficult to find ways to speak to parents, especially if they're struggling with your transition. I'm the carer, so just not speaking to them is not an option when they misgender or dead name me. And thank you so much for sharing this testimonial with us, because that's the whole purpose, actually. That's what we do at PsyMood. We try to give support to people who come from different backgrounds. I mean, we do give support to people who come from different backgrounds, who speak different languages. So the purpose today is really to give attention to the community, to transgenders. We do feel the same. So that's why we decided to we chose this as a topic for our webinar. And talking about this and following through, he was talking about how hard it was for him to transitioning. I think, Alicia, you mentioned about the body change when you are transitioning to, right? What kinds of mental health issues can appear when you are in this process of transitioning?
Yeah, so that's in relation to medical transitioning. If someone chooses to medically transition, your body is essentially going through puberty again. It is a wild ride. I support a lot of folks who do go through that. And just to speak to the comment that this person made, which thank you. I also came out and my later in life, I never came out as a youth because I grew up in a rural area where I didn't know that there was anything other than male and female. I knew something was different. I didn't know quite where I fit. And it wasn't until later on in life where I learned the language and everything that I started to come out and be more open about who I am. And I fully empathize with trying to share this with especially older parents or folks in older demographics. My father, for example, has a brain injury as well. So for him to try to remember new pronouns or remember different things about me as things were changing, it was very frustrating. And it was very hard to find support for my parents in that process, because it really is almost like a family impact. When someone comes out, typically that means that that person has been thinking about it for a very long time and has come to the point where they're ready to come out. But for family members, a lot of times that might be the first time they're hearing of it. So they haven't gone through quite that same process of understanding. A lot of times, and as parents, they want to get support for the person coming out, whether it's an adult child or an adult family member or a young youth or person. They want to get support for that person, but we kind of forget to get supports for the carers as well. And so it can be really helpful to find supports through platforms like PsyMood and through different organizations that have different databases of queer affirming support. So for example, in Ontario, we have something called Rainbow Health Ontario, where you can go and find queer specific or queer affirming supports. But that is a really important piece of the conversation when we're talking about bringing visibility to trans and non-binary genders, is that that visibility isn't just letting people know we're here, but also supporting people in knowing how to support us in those spaces, how to approach it when someone dead names them, how to approach it when pronouns are incorrect. And supporting through transition can be a really big part of that. The best thing that I can provide in regards to advice is to reach out to supports rather than reaching out solely to that person. A lot of people will expect the person transitioning or the trans person in their life or the queer person in their life to be the expert on the topic, which, as people with lived experience, everyone with lived experience is an expert, but that doesn't mean that we always want to be the voice of education. And so I always suggest to folks to go seek out other sources like queer affirming organizations or research spaces, so that way you can educate yourself on the different things that might be happening if someone's transitioning, or on the different ways someone can transition, rather than always going to that person, because it can feel a little overwhelming.
It's very important what you shared, Alicia.
Yeah,
Because,
totally.
yeah. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
I just want to acknowledge, Alicia, what you shared. Similar for me as well. So thank you to the person who wrote the comment. I came out when I was in my own coming out journey. It was kind of a different evolution. When I first came out when I was 42, I thought I was bisexual. And then I did more work on myself, and a lot of work on myself, and realized that no, I'm only attracted to women. I am identifying as a lesbian. So, and then as a 42-year-old woman trying to tell my parents, that was interesting and really, really scary. Because, you know, like many on the journey, especially later in life, we've probably dated opposite sex people. And, you know, so mom and dad have to wrap their head around that. And, you know, not all family members are accepting and open, and I'm very grateful my family is. And I had to laugh because when I wrote them an email, it was 10 o'clock here in Calgary, midnight in Ontario, and I hit send and I cried myself to sleep. I felt like I was going to be sick to my stomach. And then I woke up the next morning and same thing, these same emotions came back. And then the email from my mom, I read it, and it was very positive. And at the bottom, my mom put, "We thought something was going on and you would tell us when you were ready." And I guess you're ready. And just thinking of supports for the transgender folks here in Calgary and Alberta, there is a place called Skipping Stone that works very, very closely with the transgender community here. There's also an organization that I volunteer with in Calgary called Calgary Outlink, and they also provide resources and supports for the transgender community and the LGBTQ2S+ community as a whole. So those are a couple of ideas to look into if you're in the western half of the country.
Thank you so much for sharing actually your personal story, Amy. I guess coming out to the family must be really hard, right? Before even friends, maybe. I suppose friends, they usually know before family. I may be wrong.
It kind of depends, because coming out, the thing that a lot of people don't understand if they're cisgender or if they're heterosexual, and cisgender, if folks don't know, is just if you're not trans. So essentially, if the body you were born in and your gender identity match, you're considered cisgender. So rather than saying like you're a woman, you could be a cisgender woman or a cisgender man. But a lot of the times people think that they have to come out once. You have to come out to family, you have to come out to friends, and then that's kind of it. But no, you're constantly coming out. I still go into spaces despite identifying the way that I have for years, and I have to essentially come out. Every new job that I've had, every conference I go to, every webinar I'm in, every training, every time I meet one of my son's friends from school and their parents, like every time there is that choice where I have to decide, is this someone I want to come out to or not? So coming out isn't just a one-time process or a one-year process. It can be an ongoing process for the rest of someone's life. And so acknowledging when someone does that each time and acknowledging how hard that can be really helpful as a support person. So like my partner, for example, who is a cisgender person, constantly tells me like, "Oh, I'm proud of you for like sharing that with our son's new friends," because I don't technically have to do that, nor do I always feel safe to do that. And so it's a really weird process coming out. It's not a one-time thing, which a lot of people kind of see it as. It's an ongoing thing.
Actually, I mean, Alicia, I've never thought about this. It's very interesting what you're sharing. And it really is actually, you're always coming out. I've never really thought about that. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I guess what I would ask you, I mean, How does it feel though? What kind of feeling is it when you finally learn who you are, when you finally understand who you are, you know, how much suffering is there involved? Because although you keep coming out, as I mentioned, it's very, very hard. Not every time it's very easy. I suppose the more you do, the easier it becomes because you learn how to do it. But that person who has just realized, okay, maybe my body doesn't match my identity, what kind of sufferings does this person go through? I mean, you've been there, because I think it's important for people to understand it's not something easy. It's not just one day I wake up, okay, my body doesn't match my gender, my identity, sorry. So
Yeah, I'll start this time. Now I'm only speaking from my own personal experience. So I know when I first realized who I was at my core in 2018, I kept it silent for a whole year, just kept it to myself and told maybe a small handful of really close friends. And I know I said earlier that we're not aliens. However, when I realized who I was at my core, I felt like an alien inside my own body. And I was scared. I was so confused. I didn't know who I could trust. I didn't know who I could tell. And I felt so disconnected. I remember too, like, I was invited to an event in a park. It was like on Saturday afternoon. I was invited to go out to a park to an event. And I was like, I really don't want to go because I felt that disconnected from who I at that point thought I was. Or, it's a weird mind game that goes on. It went on in my head. And so that the suffering, the mental health piece of the anxiety of, wait a second, who am I? And the anxiety pieces of just the worry and the stress and who can I tell? Who's gonna trust my secret? Who's gonna keep my secret? Because it was a really big deal for me. Yeah, so that's a bit on the mental health pieces that I can speak to.
Yeah, in the coming out process, there's lots of things that you get kind of blindsided by, because you really think you think you know what you're going to do, and then you go to do it and there's questions you weren't expecting, or then you realize that, oh no, I have to come out at work too, or I have to come out to everyone at work, or maybe I shouldn't come out at work. And there's all these places that you have to make these decisions in, and a lot of the impacts can be a lot of times a lot of fear about losing support systems. So there is a very, very high demographic of folks who come out and then are met with combative responses and who lose the support systems that they once had. And so that can really deter people from coming out, or deter people from wanting to come out. And there was a question, I think, in the Q&A, and then one that was also sent in the chat with me, just about the fact that I have a child, and coming out constantly to my child's friends' parents or his school, and he goes to a Catholic school. So like they already have a viewpoint. And it's really difficult sometimes, because I do worry about, for example, that's one of the things that I struggle with is, are people going to then look at me like I'm a bad parent because I'm putting my child in harm's way? I don't see it as putting my child in harm's way, because I think it's just teaching him, and he's a cisgender male. That's who he is right now. That's who he's told me he is. He is 8. I don't know what his journey is going to be for the rest of his life, but for right now, that's who he is. And in my opinion, him knowing that gender diversity exists out there is just helping him to be a better human in the future. Because the reality is whether people want their kids to know that trans folks exist or not, trans folks exist. We exist. We're out there. Non-binary people are out there. Queer people are out there. And no matter what, everyone's going to come in contact with somebody from queer communities at one point in their life. And so I would rather my son and his friends and other people be able to think back and go, oh no, I've met somebody from this community and it was fine. I don't need to be scared of them. I don't need to ask weird questions. I can just understand that this is just every other person. When we walk this world not wanting people to know who we are, why is it that only a specific set of people who are straight or cis get the world to know who they are, but not everyone else? My identity is not a harm for people. My identity is something for myself, and by having to hide it, it's actually a harm for me. And it goes into that mental health piece that Amy was mentioning. So I find it really difficult sometimes, especially in regards to my son, when I have to come out in spaces with him, because I also have to weigh the safety of him as well. And so safety is a big piece, I would say, with coming out that people get concerned about. Safety not only for their physical body self, but their mental body and self, and also their support systems. And it's something that someone's going to have to weigh every single time, and there's no real right answer for how to go about doing it. It's what feels best for you. And I always just suggest to people to follow your gut. And if you don't feel good in the space, wait till you have support in that space then, or wait till you have people there that you can feel connected and supported by before entering that space in a more outward way, which is what I do with my son. If I don't feel good, I'll wait till my partner's with me too, because then I have backup and that can just help.
I saw a comment in our question and answer. I just want to quickly address it. It's from a gentleman who was mentioning about his pronouns and how a lot of time he's been correcting people and it feels about doing it. Quick and easy answer is, if someone misuses your pronouns, is just to politely just say, oh, by the way, it's blah, like whatever it is, and just quickly correct and continue on. In the reverse, I had it happen to me. I, by accident, used a wrong pronoun on somebody, and they just quickly turned around and said, oh, it's they, them. I was like, okay, continue on. So that's the quick way to work around that. I don't know if Alicia has any other thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it can feel really weird to correct people. Like, for example, for myself, I mentioned I get misgendered a lot, mostly because people assume that gender expression also means gender identity. So my gender expression, the way I dress, the way I have not done anything to alter my voice. I don't bind my chest. So people assume that I'm female because I was born female. And that's something that I regularly get called things like ma'am or sir or ma'am or like Madea. I hate it. And it was really awkward at first. And sometimes I don't want to correct people because it feels not right in that moment. And then I'm the one that has to sit there with it. However, that's something that's a cultural change that needs to happen, because if I was to walk up to someone and call them, like, if I walked up to you, Amy, and called you Fred, that's not your name. And you would correct me on that not being your name. But we don't feel the same way when we're correcting people about our pronouns. And it's just the same thing. It's something that's important to us, that represents us and who we are. And so in our society, we're fine correcting people if our name is incorrect, but we're not fine correcting people if our gender is incorrect, because it's almost like outing yourself. And that's a really scary place to be. So it's almost a systemic change that needs to happen in our society, where it's not just trans and non-binary and queer folk who need to say their pronouns, but everybody. If we all shared our pronouns, it wouldn't feel so weird when we're all sharing what they are, similarly to how we all share our name when we meet someone new. It needs to be more normalized. And until it is, I only ever recommend that you don't need to correct people. It's not your place to, unless you feel like you need to. I used to correct everyone because it was like a moral stance thing. But then I was putting myself in weird situations where I then didn't feel safe or comfortable. And so I've started kind of weighing my options. When I do correct people, sometimes I don't even tell them my correct pronoun. I'll just say, oh, I don't identify as female. And I'll leave it like that. And if they want to know more, they can ask me more. And that lets me know that they're a safer person because they're inquiring. If they're not a safer person, sometimes they'll just say, okay, and move on. Or instead of giving them a pronoun, I'll say, oh, can you actually just refer to me as Alicia? And I'll ask them to use my name instead, because it feels more comfortable to say my name out loud than my pronoun sometimes. So those are some different options that folks can use.
Thank you. I told you to, even for me, it's a big learning being with you, because a lot of things I didn't know myself how to approach. So really thank you for all this sharing. And as you were talking, you know, I was thinking about everything you have mentioned so far about, like, Amy, when you shared about all the suffering you went through, how difficult it was for you, you know, to finally realize who you were, and then to admit, to come out to your parents. I mean, you were 42 already. Alicia, you were talking about how you keep coming out all the time, and this whole pronoun discussion, as you were saying, it's very important. So society understands that there is a lot of, there are a lot of issues that actually, maybe if it was more normalized, the fact that yes, we do have different kinds of diversity in terms of gender, things wouldn't be so hard for anyone. But there's something that people usually don't talk about, which is that inside the community, there's also a lot of discrimination. I know someone, as a matter of fact, he's gay, he has a boyfriend, okay, his pronoun is he, and but he's more feminine, so he likes to wear lipstick, he likes to wear earrings, and his boyfriend doesn't like that. And his boyfriend, they keep having fights about it because his boyfriend wants him to be more male up and not so feminine. And so this was something that I was a little surprised when he shared with me. But I guess there are other sorts of discrimination too inside the community. For example, I know that that's in Brazil. I don't know if that's the same here, but in Brazil, I know that usually gays, they have to be very strong, so they work out a lot, and they have to have good jobs. Otherwise, they are discriminated inside the group. So I don't know if there are other kinds of discrimination that we could talk about, that people could be aware that discrimination is not, it happens not only from the outside, but also inside, and that caused a lot of pain and suffering.
There's a lot of discrimination. It's internal in the queer communities. And a lot of times when people see queer communities from the outside, they think, oh, that's such an accepting and loving community. And parts of it for sure are. I have great parts and great supports within communities that I have in my area and that I've had throughout my life. But then there are also parts of our community that are very discriminated against internally. And it looks different depending on identities. So for example, one of the ones that I get quite a lot in regards to being non-binary is I have friends who identify as genderqueer or gender fluid, and people will say, well, that's not really a thing, you're just non-binary. Or they'll say, well, you're not far enough along in your transition yet, so that means you're not really trans yet. And that's not necessarily true, because when someone identifies some way, that's all you need. They don't need to engage in any transitional things at all. You don't need to socially transition to be trans. You don't need to medically transition to be trans, but that's a discriminatory thing that gets shared a lot. There's also a lot of discrimination in the community towards bi folks. There is a lot of discrimination towards bi folks in saying that bi is not real, that it is just people being confused, that it's people that need to make a choice. And it's very unfortunate because it leads to additional discrimination that happens in the lesbian community, where if you have somebody who came out later in life who had male partners, people will say, well, you're not really a lesbian because you've been with men, or you're not really a lesbian because you've had a child with a man in your past. But that's something that is completely incorrect, and more so impacted by societal views and the ways that we've understood different identities as we've grown up, because everyone's taught about the identities in some specific way, usually by media. And media did a really bad job in the past at explaining different identities. And so a lot of people still feel the need to perform an identity in a certain way. And in my research, from my research side of things, that's what comes up a lot, is that there's these stereotypical ways that people are supposed to look or act or dress. So as a non-binary person, I'm supposed to have short hair and wear male presenting clothing. That is what society has told me as a non-binary person I should do. And that's not true. There's a million different representations of gender, and it doesn't look one particular way. And just the same with sexuality, there's a million ways to be someone who is part of the queer community. Amy, I don't know if you have stuff you want to add to it though.
Yeah, it's interesting because thinking of my own journey, when I thought I was bisexual with a lean to the feminine, I remember some people, and they were trying to be funny, trying to make me have, a joke or whatever, but they were kind of like, well, are you going to hit on me? And my response to them is, do you go around and wanting to kiss every man you see? Like, really, like, yes, I, at that point when I thought I was bisexual, attracted to men and women, more women than men. Yeah, it's a weird situation to be in. I do have a couple of friends who are bisexual, and they tell me it is literally they are attracted to both genders, and that's how it plays out. And they may be dating a man for a while, and they're like, that relationship ends for whatever the reason, and then they're dating a woman. I see something in the chat that kind of, or the Q&A that kind of goes about this a little bit. Someone said, I get called greedy lesbian by gay friends a lot. I'm bisexual and have identified as such for over 20 years. Never been a lesbian, though I am with a woman currently and would still identify as myself as bi. Yes, that's exactly what I was just talking about, that it's people who identify as bisexual or pansexual, they're attracted to both genders. And as I was working on myself, my own healing journey, I got thinking, I'm like, yeah, no, I dated a couple guys and boys in my time, but no, they're not romantically sexually attractive as a woman is. And there's the difference. Like, all people can find all people beautiful and good looking to a certain extent. That's a whole other topic for another day. Yet, just thinking quickly about the gender piece, and I know that I am attracted to women in a sexual romantic way. My partner and I have that. Who would I want to date? Like, who would you want to pretend to date if you could? And it's always different women that we both say. So it's just in that piece about it's okay to be attracted to both genders, and it is something that does happen. And also the discrimination or the call out of it does happen. Yeah.
I think too, like, I myself identify as pansexual and my partner is a cisgender male. So this is the person that I am spending my life with. This is the person we've been in a very committed relationship for a long time. And we have a family together and everything. So then people just assumed that I'm not pansexual anymore because I'm with a cisgender man. And that's not true. And it's very similar to what that person shared in the chat. It just because someone's bisexual and with a woman at one point, that doesn't mean they're a lesbian right now. And then if they're with a man at a different point, that means that they're now straight in some way. That's not accurate. And also it kind of goes back to more discrimination in regard to gender, because for myself being non-binary, for someone to say, oh, you're straight means being attracted to the same gender. I don't identify as being either gender. So how can that happen for me? And it almost denounces my gender identity when people say that to me. And even with pan, a lot of times people will say, oh, pansexual is just bisexual, but you're a slut. And that's not true either. It means that I'm attracted to all humans, regardless if they're cisgender, trans, non-binary, intersex, whatever. I believe that I have the capacity to feel sexually and romantically attracted to them. And that's one of the things I do a lot in my work with folks, is teaching about the different types of attraction and what that means and how that relates to identity, because we don't really learn about that growing up. We learn that you can have friends and you can have partners, and that's it, when really there's a whole plethora of different ways to express your feelings and your attraction towards different people. But then we tend to use that like as ammo against each other to say like, oh, now you're not what you've said you are, so you're lying, or you're greedy, or you're whatever slur people want to use, instead of just accepting that people can identify however they want and that that's their identity, and we have to respect that, just as we would respect anybody's identity.
I think one of the biggest problems in our society is this tendency to put labels. You know, we need to have labels for everything. We need to, so if a woman is with a woman, necessarily she's a lesbian. If a man is with a man, I mean, and people can, it seems that it's very hard for people to understand, no, that's not how things work. Things can be different and diverse. We can have different types of relations, different types of loves, and it's okay. And I guess that's where the education is very, very important, you know, to educate people, educate our society. And you mentioned, Alicia, about school, you know, and you too, Amy, when we grow up, we don't learn that in school. right? I mean, and I know countries that try to bring this conversation in this, like into our education, to the education system. There tend to be a lot of riots, you know, from people who are against it. But then in the end, what I see, my feeling is that the society itself, okay, is not prepared either. So police officers, teachers, doctors, our medical system, they're just not prepared how to handle, how to deal with this difference in, you know, in gender, in love, in the way you love, the way you, even when you approach someone, you know, usually the tendency, like when I was a teacher for a long time, so I remember that in the beginning, very beginning, I would ask, you know, do you have a girlfriend, to a boy, okay? And then from that, I changed and I would start, you know, also, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? Do you have both? And then they would look at me like, what are you talking about? You know, like as if something that I was saying was absurd. But then this change happened because the more I started learning about it, I said, well, okay, there's not just one way of being. There are different types of lives that you can lead, you know. So in order to normalize, I tried to also bring it into the classroom. Now, how do you feel about this? I mean, what could the government itself do for the you know, for the society, for the community also to feel supported? Because I think support is the word we're talking about here. You know, to have mental support, to have family support, to be supported by the community, by your community for who you are. What kinds of programs should the government put in place according to you?
I think it's really important to teach young folks, just speaking about what you were mentioning about school, because as I mentioned, as they get older, they're going to come in contact with all sorts of different people. And if we think about where kids spend most of their day, they're at school. And then when they're not at school, they're on screens right now. And I try my hardest to get my son not on screens, but it's the reality of the world we live in. Even his homework is on screens. And so a lot of the things that people are being taught, whether they're young folks or people who are maybe not part of the community and trying to become educated, are from our media. And our government doesn't really do anything to regulate that or to step in the way when things are being shared that are potentially harmful. One of the things that's really, really popular right now, and I know, Amy, we talked about this before, is the whole debate around like drag queen story time and drag queen folks and if drag should be banned. But when we're talking about visibility for trans communities, something that is very important to acknowledge is that if things like drag get banned, and that's what young people are seeing, and that's what the general society is seeing, is that drag is bad, how are you to ever, if you're walking down the street, know the difference between someone who is trans and someone who is presenting as a drag queen when they are both part of queer communities? How can you then not say, if you're someone who does not believe in trans identities, if you're someone who is a harmful person to society, that, oh, you are dressing a different way than your sex at birth, that makes you a drag queen, therefore you are to be arrested, or therefore you are to be harmed in some way. And that brings so much harm and danger to our trans and non-binary communities just by virtue of trying to ban something that is a form of entertainment and celebration of queer communities. And so I think something really important is that the government needs to step in when things like this are happening, because the knowledge we get as the general public comes from media, and they can support as many initiatives as possible. But if those initiatives aren't getting space in the media or getting space in the visibility aspect of what is being shown, then people aren't going to know where to turn, or that it's okay to turn somewhere, or that it's okay to even get support when you're seeing your identity being demonized on TV. And so I think there needs to be more regulation from the government and more stepping in and standing up against things that might be incorrect or harmful towards marginalized populations.
Yeah, I thank you, Alicia. I echo pretty much everything you just said. You know, the curriculum here in Alberta for the school was being altered and changed, and I don't want to get into politics too much, yet I know things were looking to be taken out of the curriculum that really should be staying in around the area of health, like the health units that the children are learning in schools. And just also the fact that I'm thinking of, I'm very grateful to live in Canada. And I also know, like down in Florida, for example, and other states in the United States, there's like bans about education, and they even call it the Don't Say Gay bill, where you aren't allowed to speak about the LGBTQ2S+ community in school and teach about it. There is a great video that came out a year or so ago, I guess, where a valedictorian in a high school is a part of the LGBTQ2S+ community, yet because of this law, he did his valedictorian speech and he talked about having curly hair. But that was his cue to other people to say, if you're different, if you're like me, a part of the LGBTQ2S+ community, we're good, we're cool. Yeah, and then the whole piece about the drag queens and the transgender non-binary community, yeah, it's a little scary. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I know here in Alberta, my city of Calgary, they've put a new law in place that with protesters and where they can and cannot stand, and the distance from the door and all that sort of stuff, yet it's still happening because people are still going to be people here in Alberta and around the country and do what they feel they think is best. Yet it's really harmful and it's scary, and yeah, I could go on about this, but I know we're at the hour mark already. It's been lots of fun and time's flying fast.
So let's talk about good things, because yeah, we do know there's a lot of violence that happens, unfortunately. And it's what I mentioned, I was very surprised actually to hear that, Alberta, it's like this, whereas I live in Montreal and I find the people here so open. I know, it's not everywhere, but usually I find people here so open about everything. So I'm also thankful that I live here and that I don't have to see these things, because that's one thing I like about being here in Canada. The fact that you can be who you want to be, that's what something that made me come here. So let's talk about the good side then. How can we support people then? How can we support people who are transitioning? How can we support people from the community? What tips would you give? Being a friend, being a family member?
Well, this goes with other things that I speak about, but if someone is coming to you, especially if a child, a youth is coming to you and saying XYZ, that they think they feel, they know that they're born in the wrong body, or they feel and they know that, well, maybe I'm a girl and I'm attracted to girls. When kids come and share that with you, please believe them and thank them for trusting you, for thank you for trusting me with that share. And, as they get older, you can say, well, how can I support you? How can we work together as a family or a caring adult to help you get the supports? And, if you don't know, and that's completely fine if you don't know, then let's say to the young person, well, let's look on Google ourselves. Like, let's sit down and do it as a group. And also know, and I think Alicia mentioned this a little bit earlier too, that sometimes kids don't talk to mom and dad or the caring adult in the home. Sometimes it is that school teacher or that Girl Guide, Boy Scout, soccer coach, it could be another adult that they know. So to have those open and authentic and brave conversations, with the first step is, thank you for trusting me. And I still love you. And I will accept you and support you. And as I said, if they're a little bit older, in that more older teenage year, is, well, how can I support you? What do you need from me? If they're a little bit younger, it's a bit of a different conversation. Yet if they're in that 16 plus age, it's, how can I help? What can we do together to help? And, take part in Pride events. Go to a reading with royalty. We had one here in Calgary just a couple days ago at a public library. Drag queens dressed up in red light and red storybooks. Go to Pride events, go to drag queen events. And, if you're a parent or a caring adult, that looks after kids, if I may say, like, reach out to me or Alicia or other people that can help support. There's another organization, and it's PFLAG, and PFLAG is for, no, I forget the acronym all the time, but I know it's like Parents and Friends, and I forget the rest of it, but it's a support group in a way for parents and other friends and family of an LGBTQ2S+ person. And, you know, thinking about my lovely, wonderful, amazing parents, I've actually never asked them, would they go to a Pride event? Because granted, I'm here in Calgary and they're a 4.5-hour plane ride away in Ontario. So it's a little bit different that way. But yeah, reach out. There are supports, like as I said, Skipping Stone here in Alberta, or Calgary Outlink if you're more local in Calgary. And I know Alicia said a few different things, but like, please reach out to us. Like, Alicia and I, we're here to serve. This is what, for me, this is what lights me up, is helping your child figure out who they are and be okay with it.
Thank you. That's all I can tell you.
I think too, a lot of the supports that we share, even if they're situated in Canada, because that's where Amy and I are both located, in different regions and different provinces, but in Canada, if you're in a different country, there are supports that exist out there. And if you don't know where they are, you can reach out to practitioners like Amy or I, and we will help you find those. What I always suggest to folks in regards to supporting not only yourself, but others, whether you are a person who's part of this community going through your own journey or supporting someone who is to remember that it is a journey. It's something that is not just a one-time thing where we come out and then it's over and now we're just totally different. It's a process, and your process might look entirely different than someone else's. Your child's process might look entirely different than someone else's. Your friend's journey might look entirely different than someone else's, and that is all okay. And specifically in relation to trans non-binary communities, acknowledging that no matter where someone is in their transition, and even if they do not want to transition, that doesn't devalue their identity any less. So whether someone wants to transition socially, medically, or not at all, that doesn't make them any less trans, and that doesn't make them any less valid in their own identity. The most important thing is that when someone shares with you a piece of their identity, to just accept it, acknowledge it, and thank them for sharing it, just like Amy mentioned. Asking questions like, are you sure? If they're telling you they've thought about it for a really long time and they're sure for right now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the same thing forever. I've worked with a lot of parents where I've worked with their youth or worked with their adult family members who ask, like, well, how do we know that they're sure? What if they make a life-altering decision? It's their life. And the best thing we can do is to give them the most amount of knowledge that they have to make sure that they're making the right decision for them and support them along that process. So what I would suggest is, if you don't know the answer to something and someone's asking you, go research it. If you don't know where to research, go to different websites like Rainbow Health Ontario, reach out to practitioners like us who can maybe point you in that direction. And just to speak again and to echo what Amy said, going into Pride events, whether you are part of the community or an ally to the community, whether your children have come out to you or have no concept of even what the community is, it's going to help with that education piece and letting people and children and other folks know that it's okay that these events are happening. It's okay that these places are considered safe. It is okay that this is all happening, and that we're ready to accept that this is just part of our life and want that change in society for everyone to accept that it's part of the change in our life. And so go to them, whether you're part of the community or not, because it is really just a way to uplift the folks around you and learn and educate and build those connections and supports, because they exist. They might not be as outward as we would like them to be, because sometimes we can't be. We can't be as outward as we want for safety reasons, but there are spaces where there is safety and there is connection, and that can be a really, really great thing. And to just always keep learning, because things change constantly.
Thank you so much for your sharing. And I would just like to add, okay, don't forget us, PsyMood, because that's our mission too. We're here to help people to feel comfortable and reassured. You know, we're here to support everyone. Doesn't matter what background you come from, what language you speak. And so if you need support, you can find specialists such as Alicia and Amy who are there to help you, and there are others too. Thank you again. This was really enriching. As I had told you before, I learned so much every time I'm with you too. And I'm very sorry, but we have to finish this. But it was a real pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you again in the name of PsyMood, and thanks everyone for being there too. Bye, take care everyone, have a good night.